Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to another movie review. I'm Chris Garner, joined today with Tayte Hour to give our review on First Man, which is the biographical drama film based on the life of Neil Armstrong, directed by Damien Chazelle. He's back following Whiplash and La La Land.
Yes, he
This is
is.
his third feature now, I believe, isn't it? I don't know if he's done anything before those two movies. And this is kind of a big one. I mean, if we're moving into Oscar season now, which I guess we have, we've seen the likes of A Star is Born, couple of other movies along the way that might get some kind of Oscar nod. I definitely think this one's going to be nominated for Best Picture. Ryan Gosling potentially for lead actor. But this is going to be a very divisive one, I think, because we've been talking a little bit before. And by no means do any of us hate this movie, but I think you definitely like this movie a lot more than I did on initial viewing.
Yes. I want to go ahead and say that Damien Chazelle is one of, if not the hot director to go for right now. He's now made 3 films. I think there was another film that he made before Whiplash, which was it Along Comes Madeline on a Park Bench?
I'm just going to have a look now.
Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench.
That's it.
Which was a not fully released feature-length film. He also did a short about Whiplash before Whiplash came out. Basically, his pitch, "Can I make Whiplash?" This is the first film that he has made that has nothing to do with music, which is very interesting. You got Whiplash, which was all about drumming and jazz music. You got La La Land, where one of the characters' ambitions is to become a musician.
Although apparently Neil Armstrong does play some great show tunes on the piano.
He does. He really does. But this was really the first film where he wasn't taking something that he'd written. It was finally something that he could actually base off. So everyone knows who Neil Armstrong is. He was the first man to walk on the moon. And what they did was they've taken biographical accounts for this film. They've looked into his friends and his family and tried to go for a realistic adaptation of what he was like at the time when he was training to go to the moon, his ambitions before he wanted to go to the moon. And you have differing opinions on this film from me, because I think this is probably the second best film of the year so far.
No. I wouldn't.
I think it is, Chris.
I would go nowhere near that level of hype for it. My initial opinions, yeah, go on, sorry.
Honestly, this is a big Oscar contender.
I don't disagree with that.
The screenplay is solid. The cinematography is brilliant. The acting is good. Everything combines together to make it into one of the most well-rounded films from this year's kind of nomination categories.
To me, this is a very dull movie. It's fairly lifeless beginning to end. I wasn't sort of enraptured by any of the people or the acting in this movie, for example. And your argument was that Neil Armstrong himself is a very frosty character. I believe you directly said that when we came out. That might be true, but Ryan Gosling to me is exactly the same in every single movie he's in. He ekes out emotion. There's one scene in this movie where he emotes, which was fantastic, and I really love that scene. It's towards the beginning of the film. Other than that, it kind of looks like he's slowly easing out a fart, and that's the only way I can describe his acting in every single movie I've seen him in. I thought he was completely miscast in this film. There's no charisma to him. There's no likability. You're essentially watching a wet blanket for 2.5 hours almost. It's a very long movie, and it feels every minute of the runtime for me. I think if you'd have cast anyone else, there would have been more attached to it. The movie that I always compare it to is Apollo 13. And I agree with you in that you say that that's a much more Hollywood movie. And I will definitely agree with that. But it's a much more, it's still tense. You still get on board with the characters. You still have emotion. They still do that whole space is wide and wonderful and terrifying. They hit all of the same beats as this movie does. Obviously, although in terms of missions, this one precedes the one that we see in Apollo 13. But Apollo 13 to me it's an all-round movie. It's an entertaining watch. It's thrilling. It's everything you want. You get none of that in this. And you could chalk that up to being a character piece. I get that. But it wasn't an interesting character for me to see in a biographical movie. It really wasn't.
So I have a couple of interesting points. First of all, this review is going to be very fun.
Yes, it is. I love when we have the different opinions.
Sides of the spectrum here.
It's been a while.
And it comes for a film that is going to be coming out pretty soon as well. In fact, this week, Bohemian Rhapsody, another biopic that's coming out from this year. There were talks that Sacha Baron Cohen was going to go in and do a very faithful adaptation of the character. He was going to go into the very, very, very dark points in Freddie Mercury's life. He was going to go to his lowest of lows. He was going to portray him so accurate that he actually had already done some studying. He had already almost turned himself into that character.
That would have been an Oscar contender movie without a question.
The point where they started to actually get him in costume, and he'd kind of gather materials to make himself look like Freddie Mercury himself. They decided in the end to go with a celebration of his life instead. And this is my problem with Apollo 13, and I'm going to compare it now to this film, First Man. Apollo 13 is stupendously Hollywood. A shred of accuracy is the fact that the event took place. Other than that, the actors are nothing like the real-life counterparts. And if you ever watch an interview with astronauts, barring possibly Buzz Aldrin, who is one of the more animated ones, or at least one of the more animated famous astronauts, they are all extremely frosty, driven characters, including to the point where in any situation, if anything goes wrong, they will sit there, they will think about it in their minds. They won't show a single shred of emotion, because that's the kind of person that it takes to get in there. Is the kind of person that needs to go into a fighter jet, which doesn't have much steering, as seen in one of the scenes in this film, and basically not show any fear, not show any emotions in that state. Just know that it is your job and that's what you're going to be performing. So I give actually incredible amounts of credit to this film for accurately portraying what Neil Armstrong was like in that sense. And saying that Ryan Gosling is that kind of actor who always pulls out these same performances, doesn't that make this casting possibly one of the better castings of this film? Because that is the kind of character that he portrays in other films, and this is the kind of character that he has to portray in this film.
That might be the case, but it doesn't make for an interesting person to watch for 2.5 hours.
It makes for an interesting case here, because do you go for the biopic that is less faithful to what the actual person was and is going to be possibly more kind of out there? And I say out there as in not more entertaining, because I found this film very intense. I found it very entertaining. I found it very enlightening. Or do you go for that biopic, which is dead certain, this is what happened, this is what he was like, this is what he went through, to see the kind of person that it took to send up to the moon? And I think they actually got that perfectly bang on the nail, completely brilliantly done, because you do see some scenes where Ryan Gosling's character shows emotion, but you also see the scenes that matter. He doesn't emote at all. He is completely blank-faced in the face of all this adversary to go up to the moon, all of the trials and tribulations that he had to go through to actually work to get into that situation. And that's why I personally think, first of all, he's going to be nominated for Best Actor.
He won't win.
I'm going to tell you this now. I don't think he's going to win, because I think Bradley Cooper's performance in A Star Is Born was excellent, and I think that Christian Bale looks very good in Vice. We haven't seen that film yet. I'm not sure when it's released, but we've seen one trailer for it, and wow!
I think we'll get that in January. I think that will be with like the slew of other Oscar movies that we get in January.
But you can't deny the fact that he's going to get nominated for this.
Oh,
he will get nominated.
He'll get nominated.
I think it would be a worthy nomination.
But like, I didn't. If you compare his performance to in Blade Runner 2049, for example, I didn't think his performance in this was any different from that movie. It was that robotic, stoic impression for 2.5 hours, and I think you honestly could have cast anyone and still given them like the rundown, that the tagline saying like, this is a very serious man, he's very methodical, he doesn't show much emotion, only in times when he's alone and he's isolated and he breaks down. I think you could have got any other actor and he would have expressed it with so much more charisma and a memorable quality to it, as in a role than Ryan Gosling in this movie, so I really didn't care for him. If we're looking at other performances in the movie, I honestly thought the absolute walkaway person in this movie was Claire Foy as his wife. Now,
I completely agree on that.
She performed that role incredibly well, to the point where I really hope she gets a supporting actress nomination, and I expect she will.
She will. I honestly think that she might win it as well.
Yeah.
She's been knocking on the Oscars doors for ages. I mean, her performance in The Crown, the Netflix TV drama, is she Emmy award winning for that? I want to say.
I will check it up if you want to carry on.
Just gonna have a look. Won 1 Golden Globe.
And of course, more recently, she's going to be starring in The Girl in the Spider's Web as well, the latest film that's coming out soon.
Yes, she is. So she's starting to turn into this very, very profound actress. And honestly, she drove this film very well and maybe showed the emotional sides of Neil Armstrong's character. And once again, if you see a couple of interviews with her, she is bang on. The accent was very, very good, very close, in fact. And the kind of performance that you would expect, yeah, that could win an award.
Yeah, definitely. And her scenes were definitely the most memorable, the most heartbreaking, and kind of stark look at civilian life outside of, you know, the office and everything. Like when they leave those shuttles, when they leave those tests, and when they've seen friends die, they're the people that they have to come back to, and she has to be supportive, but she also has those moments where she stands up for herself and says, like, you know, if you're going to go up there and you're going to die, you're going to tell the kids now that you might not come back. And as the film goes on, and this isn't a spoiler alert, I guess, because it's the life of Neil Armstrong, for God's sake. As like his fellow astronauts are dying in these tests, like these horrible freak accidents, there's a moment in the movie where they're waiting to blast off, I think, and they're trapped in this very small confined space. They're all in the suits, and there's a spark on one of the wires, and the entire thing sets on fire, and boom, they're dead in a heartbeat. And then you're seeing these wives living in the same street as them, where they're losing their husbands, kids are losing their fathers, and then we're seeing this plague on her mind as the film goes on, to the point where she reaches breaking point. And I thought that she was absolutely the walkaway actor in this entire movie. I don't. Oh, go on. Sorry.
I was going to say something that possibly makes it a little bit more tragic to that. This isn't really a spoiler because it's real life, and this doesn't actually have anything to do with the film itself. But Neil Armstrong actually divorced his wife, who he was with, during the film. He did remarry after that, before he died. But you can start to see the strains on that relationship throughout the film, and I'm sure this experience was something that they would have gone through together, and they were happy for each other. But you could tell all the way throughout this film the tension between Ryan Gosling and Claire Foy was incredible. There was scenes where you thought that they were madly in love with each other, and there was scenes where he was in his mindset of the job comes first, and her character and the kids go to the background. And there is a scene, if we are doing a spoiler section, maybe a small one, there's one specific scene which I think is one of the best scenes of the year, which is basically a conversation between the entire family before Neil goes up. And the tension and kind of the frostiness, it's passed around. It's very well done. Yeah.
You talked about the moment where, like with Apollo 13, it's a very Hollywood movie, and there's an element of this towards, well, it's literally almost in like the last minute of the film, which obviously a particular event happens. I don't even know if this is spoilers, because it's the character kind of sees visions of this person throughout the film. Which obviously happened, like they haven't fabricated that, but I think there is an element towards the end where it does get a little bit cheesy, and you do kind of scratch your head and think, did that actually happen while he was on the moon?
I'm actually going to look that up.
If they did, then I retract everything that I'm about to say right now. But to me, that, although it did tie up the emotional through line that the movie was having, and sort of rounded his character off and helped him reach closure, that did seem a little bit far-fetched to me. Like, that wouldn't have happened. The mission itself would have been very, you know, methodical, getting there, doing the speech, raising the flag, probably collecting a couple of samples, very mundane stuff, and then back, back to Earth. So it did kind of lose me a little bit there, although it worked in the context of a movie. But you talked about that this wasn't Hollywood. That was a very Hollywood moment to me at the very end of the film.
According to his autobiography and testimonies from the families and testimonies from other astronauts, they're saying that everyone left something on the moon, and Neil Armstrong had hinted that he had left something for his daughter on the moon. But they didn't say whether it was a bracelet or whether it was
explicit what it was. But
it wasn't explicit what it was. But all of the astronauts basically left something on the moon. I mean, astronauts in some of the later space missions, like astronauts played golf on the moon. They did loads of wacky shit on there. As soon as they were able to get the formula to get up every single time. But I do want to say that moment did feel a little bit too Hollywoody for me. And especially a film that had been so dead set and very kind of formal up until that point. It was a moment of, okay. It would have possibly been better if he just kind of left it by the module instead of having to walk over and like throw it into the crater.
Close up of it in his hand and throwing it into the crater. Yeah, that did get a little bit OTT.
It was a bit like, okay, maybe not then.
I will talk about some positives though, because there are some positives in this movie that I definitely did enjoy. And then I'm going to cycle it back around to a few more criticisms that I had with it before rounding off. But the cinematography in this movie is absolutely beautiful. It is, without a doubt, some of the most stunning imagery I've seen in the film all year. And tethered with that as well, these beautiful images, is the incredible use of sound. I definitely think this will be nominated in the technical awards for sound. And as of right now, I kind of think it deserves to win. Not only do you have these moments of, explosions and like rattling sounds inside this tin can they're essentially in, because you do get that sense of how frail and fragile these crafts are that they're going into the void in. And the use of sound plays that perfectly. The heavy breathing, the tension that's created in those scenes where things do start to go wrong is absolutely palpable. But it's also the importance of the use of silence. And this is mostly towards the very end of the movie where they're trekking towards the moon and it is the moon landing. There's a moment where the sound completely cuts out for like a good stretch of time. Like it was getting to the point where I thought, like, is this a fault with the projector? Like, has the sound cut out? But if you think to some of the most memorable moments of cinema, at least in the recent years, and I can't believe I'm going to this as an example, also a space movie in some way, The Last Jedi, one of the most memorable moments of that film. Obviously, people have analyzed it now and realized that it's absolutely dumb moment in the context of Star Wars overall. But the minute where they achieve light speed and crash through the ship and the sound just cuts out and you just have that imagery, you can have so much impact with the use of silence. And I think this movie absolutely achieved that to perfection, because it does give you that 2001 A Space Odyssey sense of how vast space is, how alienating and terrifying it is, yet beautiful as well at the same time. So I will applaud Damien Chazelle for that. And obviously, Linus Sangren did the cinematography. I'm going to check his credits to see what he's done before.
He did La La Land, American Hustle, Battle of the Sexes. He also did Joy, which is a film that, it's one of those films which kind of fade into memory, but you can definitely see the cinematography between that. I'm going to also give another negative of this film. I did like the use of the shaky cam when they were in the fighter jets and when you were launched in the rocket. But dear Lord, every time he was walking around, every single scene felt like it was handheld, felt like it was shaky cam.
It reminded me of Man of Steel, that very personal handheld thing. And I guess they tried to make it seem more like a documentary or like you were there in person with them. But I was getting motion sick from half of the shots in this movie.
You didn't need to use it for half the shots in this movie. The only scenes where you really needed to use that is the scenes where the actual character was shaking. Yeah. So in the fighter jet, in the space shuttle, in those kind of situations. That's probably one thing which I didn't quite like.
It was distracting as well, because there are moments where it's like, why would you do that? You've got a you've just ruined a great shot. And then it would switch to a still image and it'd be great.
Mm.
I get the use and application of, you know, camera techniques like that, but for me, I completely agree with you there. They were kind of unjustified in a lot of scenes. In the scenes as well where things are going wrong, the camera's shaking around in the shuttle with them, but I didn't so much have a problem with that because that would be the only way, and it did make you feel like you were in that shuttle with them, and you know things were going crazy, our arms were flailing, the red lights are beeping on control panels, everything like that. The final negative I really have with the film, it's not a huge negative, as we just said, like the camera work and things. I was really kind of underwhelmed by Justin Hurwitz's score for this movie.
Oh no, I was going to talk about that. I liked it.
There are so many cues in this soundtrack that you can immediately hear La La Land in.
I have to say there was one where I did think, oh my god, are they about to play me and Sebastian's theme?
We're about to enter the planetarium scene again from La La Land.
No, seriously, I did quite like it. It's very samey, but like, you hear notes of it and then it changes. There's a bit more of a 60s, late 50s, early 60s vibe to the actual music that's used in the film, which is slightly different from La La Land, which kind of sweeps in with a more orchestral score and heading towards kind of a classical tone. This film, I think the soundtrack quite worked. There were moments where you heard it very heavily. There were moments where it was quiet and in the background. I think the biggest scenes where you could hear it was when they were approaching the moon. The score on that, I feel like my cinema dialed it up to 10 on the speakers for that one. And the quiet moments, the scenes where it's just Claire Foy and oh my god, I'm mind blanking here. Ryan Gosling, just kind of having quiet moments in their home. You can hear the music over the top, and it brings a sense of togetherness into the film. Why did you dislike it, Chris?
It's the music. It just sounded like the B-sides off La La Land. That's all I could hear, and it didn't seem to have another film that George, because obviously George was going to be on this review, but his schedule's kind of, you know, all over the place at the moment, so we couldn't get him onto the review. But you and George both said that you got a lot of Interstellar vibes from this movie. Now, don't get me wrong, Interstellar isn't one of my favorite Hans Zimmer scores, but when that music kicks in, it is vast when that kicks in, and that captures more of the essence of space for me and everything that goes along with it. This just really didn't do anything for me. This didn't wow me at all. It feels just like it's the La La Land soundtrack played on a theremin, which is the theremin's a musical instrument. It was used in Mars Attacks, where it's like this very like old school Doctor Who theme.
Yeah, it's used in the Doctor Who theme.
Two antennas on oscillators and frequency.
Yeah, Neil, the reason why they had a theremin in the actual musical score was because Neil Armstrong played the theremin.
Oh,
so
really?
That is the reason why they had it in the score, Chris.
I retract it. But in terms of musical notation, I couldn't. It just sounded like just listening to it, I was like, that's Justin Hurwitz, because that sounds exactly like La La Land. And sure enough, the credits hit, and it was. Yeah. Going to another space movie, and I'm going right back to Apollo 13. James Horner's soundtrack to that movie is incredible. It's absolutely a flawless soundtrack, and it completely fits the movie. And with that soundtrack, I got much more of a, you know, vast, grand, cinematic feel to the soundtrack. I really didn't get that with this one. So there were a lot of scenes where the cinematography is fantastic, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's everything you want, but the soundtrack alongside it just did nothing for me. It didn't inspire me in any way.
For this film, I was suggested that I would watch it in IMAX. I didn't watch it in IMAX in the end. I watched it in standard definition, but I do have a friend who saw it in was it 4XD, the one with the moving seats. Oh, and apparently that was a very good experience. He said that they had it shaking on because I did question him on the whole shaky cam things. Shaking when the rockets were blasting off. Apparently, you feared for your life. You basically had to hold on. You had to like go for it. Which is apparently really cool. So I guess we move on to the final point. Would you suggest this movie, Chris?
This is a very different movie. Apollo 13. That is a Hollywood movie. I will definitely agree with that. I don't think this is a very accessible movie for a lot of people. I did hear mixed reactions from some people at the back of the cinema. This went like, well, I liked it, but it didn't quite hit me in the way I wanted it. You know, like I wanted it to, and that's exactly kind of where I was coming at it from it. It is a very long movie. A lot of it is this very formulaic, you know, methodical approach as they're getting towards that moon landing. Another film I'll compare it to is, oh God, Zero Dark 30, where the last 10 minutes of the film is great. The payoff is fantastic, but there's a lot you've got to get through to get to that point. I do think this is a much better movie than Zero Dark 30, which I wasn't too over keen on, and that did get a lot of overhype, I think. You do get some great supporting cast performances in this movie. The cinematography is gorgeous, and when you do get those epic space shots, you do almost feel like you're there. And now you've said that about that for whatever, what was it, 4H, what was, did you call it, the experience?
4XD
4XD. Now that I know that that exists, I would love to go to that thing, because that sounds absolutely incredible. I'd love to do that. But I don't know if it was Gosling's performance or what it was, but it felt very slow to me. It is an absolute slow burn movie. And usually I like slow burns, but this just didn't capture my attention. The space scenes are great, but they're very few and far between. And also, minor point, which kind of, I was expecting this shot. It was going to be the most iconic shot of the movie. There is no American flag being planted on the moon surface. When I think of the moon landing, that is immediately what I think of. I think,
the reason why the American flag wasn't there was because it isn't about the story of NASA. It isn't about the story of the Americans getting to the moon. It's the story about Neil Armstrong. And that is kind of almost amplified in the scene where he has the bracelet of his child. It's the story of how he can get her to the moon, basically. And it's a very personal experience. You don't see the story told from other people's perspectives, apart from possibly Claire Foy in one scene. Everything else is told from Neil's perspective. It isn't Neil with every single shot, there's an American flag in the background. No, it is Neil going through hell to make sure that he gets on that spaceship to go up to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And it leaves you with an experience where when he gets onto the moon, it makes you think, holy shit, he actually got there, not holy shit, when's he going to put the flag up? And I'm actually happy they didn't have the flag putting up in the actual film, because the flag took like 10 minutes to actually put up. They had to drill into the ground. They had to hoist things up. It's a very boring sequence, and there wasn't really a ceremony that went about it. And that would have made it probably more Hollywood than the whole letting go of the bracelet into the crater thing. And I'm happy they actually avoided that. And even though it is a film about the moon landing, and that may be one of the most iconic things from the moon landing, they still had the one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind line.
I wanted to bring that up actually very quickly,
yeah.
sorry, and then you know, you can carry on with your rounded off. I don't know if they used the actual recorded audio of that moment, or if they did get Ryan Gosling to still record the lines, but the characterization of Neil Armstrong we get in the movie with Ryan Gosling, the way that he spoke and the way that he talked when they did land on the moon, and we get that archetypal speech, it felt completely alien from the character of Neil Armstrong we'd seen before that point. When he's making that landing, you know, he's shutting warnings off, he's very focused on getting there, he's switching to manual, he's not talking, he's not very vocal. And then when he lands on the moon, you know, he's cracking jokes. He's saying, like, you know, I'm getting ready to step down the ladder. And he's very descriptive of everything he's doing, which he hadn't been at that point. And it felt very not in keeping.
It was Ryan Gosling's delivery, but it's the exact dialogue of what was said in the transcript.
That's what I mean. But the exact dialogue of Neil Armstrong didn't match the characterization or the performance of Neil Armstrong we'd seen at that point in the movie. It felt very different to me.
I feel like it was more of kind of relief that they finally got there as soon as they'd had contact light and they were down on the actual moon. That didn't bother me at all. In fact, I think that scene paid great homage to the actual experience of them landing on the moon. Overall, I think this film is a long film. It does feel long when you watch it, but it was a very good experience. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Honestly, I would go see it again, possibly not in cinema, because there's other films that I need to see this month. But I would definitely pick this up on DVD. I really enjoyed the experience. As far as Chazelle films, I mean, for me, both Whiplash and La La Land are in my top 10 films of all time. So you've got to compare that to this film. This film wouldn't break that, would be nowhere near. I enjoyed the film. for what it was, and I think it's a brilliant film, but I wouldn't put it up there with my favorite films.
Right.
And I think that'll be kind of the experience that a lot of people will have. They will say it's a very good film, it has very good cinematography, has good acting, or that's debatable in your case. Or they'd say it was good directing and stuff like that. But I don't think it will ever become anyone's favorite film. And I think the box office totals for it kind of reflect that completely, as it's been overshadowed by other films that have been brought out this month. The fact that it's come out in the same month as all of these great films as well makes it very difficult for it to kind of make its way. And there is a small fear that it could be completely taken out from the Oscar picks because it hasn't made much in the box office. We've seen it happen with some films before. They get released at this time a little bit earlier than some of the other Oscar films, and suddenly they become forgotten as it goes on through. Personally, I think it will be remembered by time of Oscar season, but I think it probably would have done better if it was released a month later.
Is this going to be a slight against it? It feels like a very high budget made for TV movie / documentary in some parts. As opposed to the space landing stuff, obviously that is very cinematic, but all the stuff before that point didn't feel particularly cinematic.
It's a very heavy-handed drama film, and a lot of that is purely based on the acting and not the set piecing and everything that goes around it. And they focus and rely very heavily in some parts of the film on just the acting alone, and that can leave you feeling, am I watching a film? Am I watching something at home on TV? So I do kind of get where you're coming from that. I would still suggest watching it.
Yeah,
I would still completely suggest watching it.
In terms of it not being remembered as much, say, for example, as Whiplash or La La Land, I think that those two movies in particular are very, I don't want to say original, but they're very unique subject matter and everything like that. First Man, if we're looking at space movies, space exploration, biopics, they're kind of a dime a dozen, but, you know, we've seen a lot of them. We've seen very similar images before. We've seen other biopics before, not necessarily about Neil Armstrong, but maybe that's why it won't land as much as, or be as memorable, for example, as Whiplash is, which, if you're thinking about a movie about like a really obsessive jazz musician and like this very strict teacher, right now, off the top of my head, maybe I could think of some other comparisons, but right now I can just think of Whiplash. If we're looking at La La Land, for example, I know it harkens back to like old musicals and old style cinema and everything like that, but in a modern day context, in terms of like a big musical like that with the ending that La La Land does, I could only think of La La Land. So maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
Well, I want to put something forward here, and this is maybe a chat with cinema itself. When was the last time you saw a biopic that was done in a similar way to this? Because when I think of biopics in recent years, I'm thinking Wolf of Wall Street. I'm thinking Vice from this year. Biopics have completely changed.
Yeah.
I think that now you have to do something edgy or out there, or maybe fabricate some of the events. Do something like I, Tonya from last year. It's got to be almost a mistelling of the actual person's life events. And this harkened back to the kind of biopics where it was almost like a documentary.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like in some parts. And maybe it's because this area of biopic is dying and people want more excitement out of cinema, and they're less inclined to watch films which is just people talking, or even just a screenplay, like a film such as A Few Good Men, which has a brilliant script, but it feels like you're watching theatre. And I think that the kind of biopic that this film made, or this film was made from, is dying. And maybe Chazelle should have seen that and possibly gone for a completely different approach, a completely different film. And that's probably the same reason why Bohemian Rhapsody, which is also coming out, went for the lighter-hearted one. They wanted to go for, oh, okay, so these biopics done very well in the last few years. We'll go for that kind of theming. And that's really down to where audiences at nowadays, where they want instant gratification. They want instant kind of that dopamine response of, oh, I want action. Oh, I want quippy dialogue. Oh, I want that. Sometimes you want to just sit back and you want to watch a really interesting film which breaks down everything that a person wanted to go through to get to the moon. And that's what this film delivers on.
Very, very final point. I'll address one of the comments in the comments in the comment section.
Yeah.
Is the filming of the last scene? I'm just reading this here. The moon landing sequence, apparently, this is according to Wikipedia, was shot in a local rock quarry at night, and Chazelle and the cinematographer Lina Sangren decided to shoot that scene in IMAX 70mm film. I love the film look of this movie. You see the film grain. It does feel very of the time. It feels absolutely a period piece. And there's just, I love film. I love seeing that grain in the film. And it did lend itself well to that kind of documentary feel as well that we just talked about. I think if this movie had been shot in digital, you would have lost a lot of texture to the movie and that kind of historical period to it. But we've had a comment from Auburn who says that, and Tate's just replied to it, I guess.
I've already
but
replied to it.
We can bring
will read it out here, yeah.
Yeah, so it's, I guess my question is, given the positives, including phenomenal cinematography, do you think I would miss something if I just waited to watch it on DVD? If you like space movies, if you do like taking in those vast recesses of space kind of thing, I would absolutely recommend seeing this on the big screen. The sound is incredible, and I think that unless you've got the biggest TV with the greatest sound system in the world, I think you will absolutely lose a lot of the impact that those shuttle sequences and space flight sequences do have. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend checking it out on the big screen. Would I recommend it on IMAX? With exception to the final 10 to 15 minutes of the movie, I'm not sure I would. There doesn't seem to be a lot in the movie to warrant that cinematic feel up until that point. As we said, it's very, documentary style.
I'd say the opening scene and the ending scene, really, would be the two scenes that will warrant it.
There's a lot of scenes in the suburbs, in the house, in like narrow boardroom meetings and things like that. Whereas at the end, obviously, the moon landing is incredible. See that on the biggest screen that you can. I probably wouldn't say IMAX for it. I think you'd be fine seeing it just on a big screen at your local cinema or whatnot. But I definitely would recommend seeing it on the big screen while it's still out if you can. I've pretty much said everything I can on this movie. I don't know if you've got anything.
Yeah, no, I've said everything that I can on this movie as well.
Yeah, okay, so that'll do it for our review on First Man. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of the movie. Did you enjoy it? Didn't you like it? Where would you rank this with Chazelle's other movies? Anything regarding this movie, or indeed any of the other movies that have come out in 2018 that might have potential for Oscar contenders? Please do let us know. We'll be going live at some point this week for a Bohemian Rhapsody review, I think. It's out tomorrow for us in the UK. I'm not sure whether I'm getting to it tomorrow or Thursday, but I will be seeing it this week. What else do we have coming out? We've got more trailer reactions. I need to backdate one of them. The Curse of La Lorna or something, isn't it? Whatever the new Conjuring movie is. I don't know. They're cranking out so many of them. We've just had The Nun a matter of weeks ago, and they're already scheduling the new one. It seems like they're turning it into the new Marvel Cinematic Universe or whatnot. Yes. The point is, we will have plenty more content coming out. We've definitely ramped up the content over the last couple of weeks, and we're going to continue to do that. And be sure to check out next week, Wednesday, for our very special Halloween Battle of the Brackets episode. We're going to be doing a vote as to what you guys want to see us argue. We've got 3 possibles. So follow us on Facebook and Twitter and all our social media links. Links to those are in the description down below. And we will get a poll out very, very soon. And you can get voting on what you want to see us argue for Battle of the Brackets. So for our video today, that'll do it. And until the next one, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.